We start with the Trump administration that has deported hundreds of Venezuelan migrants to El Salvador. The migrants were accused of being members of the Tren de Aragua gang. This action came despite a federal judge's order that temporarily blocked such deportations. White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt defended the administration's actions, saying the order lacked a legal basis and claimed it did not refuse to comply with rulings. The deportations were carried out under a proclamation by President Donald Trump, which declared the Venezuelan gang to be a threat to U.S. national security. This action was based on a 1798 law called the Alien Enemies Act, a law normally used in times of war. The law gives the president extraordinary powers to remove foreigners who are considered a threat. It has been used rarely in U.S. history, last applied during World War II. The Trump administration did not provide evidence to support its claim that the deported Venezuelans were part of this Tren de Aragua gang, nor did they identify criminal activities committed by these immigrants in the U.S. The deportations have raised concerns about the possibility of falsely accusing migrants of being gang members and removing them without due process. While El Salvador agreed to house around 300 deported immigrants in its prisons, the move has sparked outrage, particularly among immigration advocates who warn that the Alien Enemies Act could be used to target any Venezuelan citizen who is in the US and might be labeled as a gang member without opportunity for defense. Meanwhile, civil rights groups called for immediate clarification from the Trump administration. They claim the US government may have broken the court's rule. Let's in fact listen to what the US president had to say.
Well, this is a time of war because Biden allowed millions of people, many of them criminals, many of them at the highest level. They emptied jails out. Other nations emptied their jails into the United States. It's an invasion. And these are criminals, many, many criminals, murderers, drug dealers at the highest level, drug lords, people from mental institutions. That's an invasion.
We are now joined by Ross Feingold, political risk analyst, to discuss this further. Ross, thank you very much for joining us. So these Venezuelans, they were deported using this Alien Enemies Act of 1798. That was last used during World War II. How does this application of a centuries-old law align with contemporary legal standards or this administration's legal standards? And what precedent might it set for future, not just immigration policies, but also using old laws in policies that the Trump administration wants to push forward?
It's certainly a novel use of the Alien Enemies Act. It has not been used this way to deport illegal migrants in the past, but that doesn't mean that it's bad law or that it's inappropriate. There's no court that's thrown out the Alien Enemies Act. It was used in inappropriate ways during World War II when it was used to detain Japanese simply because they were ethnic Japanese and America was at war with Japan. And many of those Japanese who were detained during World War II pursuant to this act were in fact U.S. citizens. But that's not the case with some of the people that are being subject or who are being deported subject to this law. So it may be a novel use. The United States is not technically at war. The United States government has not gone through the procedures to say that we are at war at the moment. They have designated some of these transnational criminal gangs as terrorist organizations, which does help the government's case to say that we are pretty much in wartime and the Alien Enemies Act will apply. But this is going to go through the courts. As you mentioned, there's already been one judge who's expressed concerns about this, and he had actually ordered a halt on deportations. But we'll have to see how this plays out, especially at the appellate level and all the way up to the Supreme Court. There's a very good chance that this conservative Supreme Court will uphold the U.S. government's right to cite the Alien Enemies Act to deport these people.
Ross, wouldn't some people say that the fact that the Trump administration does not provide any evidence of these individuals being part of this Tren de Aragua gang, is that not a fair criticism for people to make?
It's certainly a fair criticism to make, but again, if the United States government believes that these people are members, even if there's the possibility of mistakes, the government is still going to proceed with deportations. Now, of course, there'll be lawyers and non-government organizations that rush to court, but again, the courts might give the government wide latitude to deport illegal aliens. And although illegal aliens typically do have a right to be heard, the government could decide to move faster. That's also a right of the government. So we're definitely going to be entering a very litigation-heavy period with regard to what the Trump administration is doing and how it's applying the Alien Enemies Act. But I'd be very cautious about saying that what the government has done won't be upheld, because it might very well be upheld as it goes through the court system. I
want to go a bit more into the fact that this federal judge has ordered against this, the fact that these individuals were deported to El Salvador. What legal challenges could arise from the administration's decision to proceed despite this court order? And how might this affect the balance of the judiciary and the executive?
That's a really interesting question, because it will be up to the judge to order sanctions on U.S. government officials if it is proven that the government, the Trump administration, violated a court order. Now, the government's going to argue that we didn't violate a court order. These deportations were in flight before the judge ordered a halt. But ultimately, who is the judge going to really sanction? They might sanction the lawyers who argued in court on behalf of the government, but the court is not going to have the ability to bring these people back if they've already been deported. So at first glance, the court does have authority to punish the government, but in reality, it's really difficult to change the situation if the government has already deported these individuals.
As we've said previously, this act has historically been used during times of war. But how does its current invocation reflect this current administration's stance on immigration? And what are the broader implications for civil liberties of these immigrants?
Now, unfortunately, the answer to that question is we don't know, and it's another question that's going to have to be litigated in the courts, because the administration is going to argue that there's been an invasion of illegal aliens. It is a national security emergency, and thus we are allowed to apply all existing laws, including this law that dates from 1798. And the courts might very well agree with the government. In fact, I would say there's a high likelihood that this Supreme Court, which is 6-3 conservative, that if these cases do reach the Supreme Court, that they're going to say that this was a decision for the administration to make. It's not really a decision for the courts to intervene in. The administration has the right to declare a national security emergency and to declare illegal migrants subject to deportation and carry out those deportations. So the courts might very well side with the administration, but we'll just have to wait for this court process to play out.
Ross, one final question. Political figures like Elon Musk advocating for the impeachment of this judge who blocked the order. How might such political pressures influence judicial independence and the rule of law in the United States?
Certainly, conservatives frequently criticize liberal judges, and liberals criticize conservative judges. I don't think there'd be enough votes either in the House to impeach or in the Senate to remove them from office. They have to get 2/3 of senators to vote to remove the judge from office. I think that's really unlikely. But we'll probably see a lot more of that in the coming months as litigation arises from some of the actions of the Trump administration, that either there'll be conservatives who are unhappy with the judge's decision, or there'll be liberals who are unhappy with the judge's decision. That's why the courts on some of these matters are going to look to not make a decision, frankly. They're not going to seek to intervene. And again, to use this example, the courts might very well find that it's up to the administration to decide whether or not there's a national security emergency and thus invoke the Alien Enemies Act. So the judges might very well punt on some of these issues rather than get involved in political decisions.
Ross Feingold, thank you very much for joining us.